Well, hello folks. It's been about 5 months since I installed my Radeon 6970M in my late 2009 27-inch iMac. The last video I did on the subject was May 3rd of this year, 2020. So I wanted to give you a status report on what's been happening over this past summer, since it's now well along in the month of September. And I also want to cover some frequently asked questions that I often get in the comments section. Now, I read and reply to every one of your comments, so I know what the most often asked questions are, and so as to avoid having to repeat myself over and over again, I wanted to make this video today to be able to answer that. And that way, if I get asked those questions in the future, which inevitably I will, I can just link to this video and be able to provide a more detailed answer. By the way, this video is indexed, which means that there are timestamps in the text description that you click and you can jump to the actual Q&A or the part of the video that you want to hear and see. Also in the bottom, where the slider is, you can jump to various parts of the video more easily that way too. Now, I normally, when I make my videos, I just wing it. I don't have a teleprompter or anything like that. I just kind of speak what's out of my mind. I do a little preparation, of course, to know what I'm going to say. But today, to make sure that I'm not going to miss anything, I made some, copious amounts of notes, 2 pages worth here, that if you see me glancing down, that's what I'm going to be looking at. I'm not going to read it, but basically just remind myself what the Q&A topics that I need to cover. Also, there have been a few of you who have reported on some of my videos that, oh, what's that road noise? It's so bothersome. I'm at home, and whenever I'm at home, it is bothersome, and I agree. But in Japan, everything is so cramped. There's no setback from the building and the road. You're just right up against the road, and unfortunately, I happen to live on a road where a bus comes by, where big trucks come rolling by, and so if you hear some cars, I try my best to use isotope to filter it out, but I can't always get that out. I could, but it would eliminate a lot of my voice too. So please just bear with me for that. I apologize. Most of my videos, I try to shoot them after hours at the office because it's in a more rural area where there's not any or not many cars coming by, at least in the evenings. But here at home, especially during the daytime like this, there are cars. So just wanted to mention that. So with Q&A, to start out, there have been a number of you who have asked, should you warm up your oven prior to the bake? And the answer is yes. That's the answer. And the reason why is, if you think about it logically, if you cold start your oven and then you put in the card, you're going to time it for 10 minutes, right? Well, some ovens may not even warm up to 200 degrees Celsius or 400 degrees Fahrenheit in 10 minutes. So you're not going to get a good bake out of that. You need to warm up your oven to the actual bake temperature, which again is 200 degrees Celsius, which is approximately 400 degrees Fahrenheit. It's actually 396. It's a little bit lower than that, but it doesn't really matter a whole lot, that variance. It's a little bit higher in Fahrenheit, but that's okay, because most ovens, they don't let you set 396 or, some more precise adjustments like that. But yes, you do need to preheat your oven. And I would recommend putting your video card not only on the foil standoffs that I've talked about in my other videos, but also put it on a tray. And that way it's easy to put in, right? Because it's going to be on those little feet. And if you try to put the feet in one by one and then put the card on those feet when your oven's really hot, it's going to be difficult to do that. So if you have a metal tray that you can just easily slide in, that's what I would recommend to you. Next, a fairly large number of you have reported after your bake, after the repaste, you've assembled everything, the fans of the iMac are running at full blast. Now, you'll be able to easily know that's true because they're audible. They're very, very noticeable, and normally they're not running at full blast. And the reason for that is because you either forgot to reconnect a cable or you improperly reconnected it. So I'm sorry to say, what you're going to need to do is open up your Mac again and check all your connections. There is a lazy man's trick to get around that. I call it a lazy man's trick instead of a lazy lady's trick because we men tend to be lazier than the ladies. The lazy man's trick is you download one of the fan control apps that I have linked in the text description underneath my videos, and you install and use that. That's a band-aid. It's kind of what I would call a hack, but since I recommend you use those fan control apps anyway to keep the base fan speed running higher than Apple's very, very low fan speeds normally in order to keep your video card cooler, then, it really doesn't matter for most people. But I am one of those meticulous electrical engineering types. You want to, if you can really make time to do a job right, do a job right, which means solve the root problem, go back in your iMac, find that improperly connected cable and just connect it properly. Then when your fans are running at their correct speed, then install that fan control app and boost them up a bit. I have mine set, all 3 fans currently set to 2000 RPM. When I had my 4850 card after my second bake, which again, I got 2 years and 9 months of life out of that, I had it set to about 1800 RPM, all 3 fans. And the reason I have all 3 fans set a bit higher now is because I have a different video card. It's a 6970M, which is a hotter running card. And so I want to keep that cooler without maxing out the fans. Now I had one guy, he's a PC from the Windows world and PC user, and he said, it doesn't bother me, fan noise doesn't bother me. Well, if fan noise doesn't bother you folks, sure, max out the fan speed. By all means, because the faster the fans are running, the cooler it's going to be. However, for practically speaking, most of you aren't going to like that. It's not going to be your favorite thing. And so for that reason, I would say keep your fans about 1800 RPM or 2000 RPM because those speeds really aren't too annoying. You can hear the fan, but personally, it doesn't bother me. It doesn't bother me. So choose the highest fan speed to where the acoustics don't bother you. Okay. Next, this one is so rare that I really don't even need to mention it, but I don't want just the majority of you to find success with a bake. If possible, I want all of you to have success. And toward that end, I'm going to reply to this comment about components falling off during the bake. This is something new. It's been reported this year primarily, and only by a handful of people. Very small in number. If you look at the comments under all of my videos, especially my first and second bake, you'll see that there's hundreds upon hundreds of comments. So more than a couple thousand comments now, and I read and reply to every one. So there's a lot of comments, and out of all of those comments, there's just, I think maybe 3 people total who have mentioned that components fell off sometime during the bake. And when they pulled out their tray, they found those components desoldered. And they asked me, well, this bake is flawed, or what is the cause of it? What's going on here? And the simple answer is, your oven was too hot. The temperature of 200 degrees Celsius and 400 degrees Fahrenheit is at the very threshold of the highest temperature we ought to use. Now, that is not a temperature that's going to liquefy all of the solder. If it did, all of the components on the bottom side of the board would fall off. So these temperatures we're talking about for this bake are not that hot. But even if you properly and intelligently set your dial on your oven to 200 degrees Celsius or 400 degrees Fahrenheit, it is possible that your oven may be defective in that the actual temperature may be higher than what you set. And it may not be a whole lot higher, because it doesn't have to be a whole lot higher. Now, obviously, if it's 201 degrees centigrade or 401 degrees Fahrenheit, that's not high. 1 degree higher is not going to suddenly liquefy the solder. But if you're getting towards 208 degrees, 210 degrees Celsius, and the like, that's getting into the danger zone, because again, we're right on the threshold. So what I would suggest from this point onward If you haven't done the bake yet, it's not absolutely necessary because, again, this problem is very rare. But to be 100% perfect, I would suggest you put a turkey thermometer or some kind of oven-safe thermometer inside your oven during the preheat time, at least during the preheat time. And hopefully you have one of those oven doors that has a glass part, you can actually see through it. Or if you have one of those oven-safe thermometers that has the actual thermometer run by wires. Sometimes for barbecues they have those types where you can run an external unit away from the heat source and then see, maybe even on your iPhone, there are some of them that have Wi-Fi or Bluetooth and you can see the data that way. But basically, you want to watch that temperature. And if you're doing a preheat, you're going to see it go from 0 all the way up to 200 degrees Celsius or 400 degrees Fahrenheit. And if you see any fluctuations that go lower than those temperatures, if it goes much lower, then the bake's not going to be effective, but it's not going to damage the card. The problem is if it goes higher and stays higher. That's really what you're looking for. So you want to make sure that during the preheat time, it doesn't go beyond those 200 degree, 400 degree markers. If it's 1 degree higher, it's not a big deal. But you don't want it to be 5, 8, 10 degrees or more higher. And if you have enough space in your oven that you can just leave the thermometer in there and keep monitoring it, it's only a 10-minute bake, so you can probably have enough patience to just sit there and watch it. Make sure your temperature is spot on. And if you see your thermometer, the temperature on the inside is going up way beyond what it should be, you need to take your card out of there. Because if it gets too much higher, like I said, components will fall off. So hopefully this will help even those of you who have faulty ovens discover that you have a faulty oven, and you can take your card out before the damage occurs. And I'm sorry to say that if the damage does occur, if you have components that are desoldered and fall off, even if you were able to figure out where they go, which you probably won't, and even if you were able to figure out the correct orientation, some are polarized, if it actually got hot enough for some components to fall off, it is very possible that you did not actually mount your card perfectly flat. I mean, even if it looks flat, it could be 1 degree off. And you know what happens with water, right? If you put water on an angle, remember Jurassic Park, the movie where he does the little water thing running down her hand? Yeah, it's the same thing. So there could be other components that had shifted out of place, some components that were close to each other but not touching before but are touching now. And I've had people who actually tried to resolder the components that fell off, and they thought they fixed it, and they tried it, and it didn't work. And so that indicates that their parts were sliding around. So I'm sorry to say that if you do have an oven that's on the fritz, and if you don't catch that problem and take it out, and if components do slide around because it got too hot, then probably you won't be able to fix it, and you're going to have to replace the card. So again, that's why I'm adding it in this frequently asked questions part today. Next, some people have asked if it's safe. Is the bake safe? Well, I will admit I'm not a doctor, and I will admit I'm not a scientist who has conducted a case study on multiple people. The case study I've conducted is on my own family of 4, and I just happen to have baked my video card 4 times in our family oven in which we bake food. And we have no, adverse health effects. I have a convection type oven which has a blower fan that moves air, and as you know, the air it's not sealed, it pulls air from the outside, so it is circulating the air. But again, we are at temperatures to where it's not completely liquefying all of the solder, it's loosening the solder. And even though there is a residual amount of flux, which is a little liquid on there that helps the metal solder reflow, even though there is a little bit of flux, and it's usually the flux when heated that causes it to smoke a little bit, we're not talking about temperatures that would melt enough solder to where even that flux would smoke up your oven. It shouldn't be doing that. Mine certainly didn't. And after each and every one of my bake, I did the smell test, and I couldn't smell anything. Now, if you have an oven that is not a convection type, which means it doesn't have a blower fan, I cannot say if you're going to smell anything or not, But again, I don't think you're going to be burning enough flux to where it would be smelly. And that vapor or that smoke that's coming off, it's not vaporized lead, so you don't have to worry about that. And if you're really worried about it, just let your oven cool down after the bake and wipe it down. Yeah, I know wiping down the oven is no fun, but you need to do it sometimes anyway. So if you're concerned about it, then go ahead and do that. Now, I'm talking to a lot of men. There are some of you ladies out there who do the bake, so I know that it's not only men watching me, but we men, we don't think so deeply about these things. And I think perhaps that's why we get married, because we want to live longer. Our wives help us to live longer and caution us about things, and rightfully so. But really, I just don't feel that this is something to worry about. However, if you are unable to convince your better half, your spouse, that this is safe, then you're going to have to borrow a friend's oven. Some people have said, oh, I'll just use a heat gun. Well, if you're a professional with it, sure. There have been some people who have reported success, but unfortunately, those people have not told me their techniques in detail. I myself have always used the bake in the oven, so I've never had to use a heat gun. With a heat gun, you've got a lot of concentrated heat there, and you run the risk of desoldering other components. And that's really my fear, and that's why I don't really strongly recommend the heat gun. But if you were able to put pieces of metal around the GPU chip, for example, one of those little click, 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 click X-Acto knife blades, you know, the replaceable blades that you have, if you put a blade on each of the four sides of the GPU so that you can direct heat down on the GPU and the heat will not spread to the other chips. And if you apply the heat just right so that you don't desolder the GPU, then yes, it would work. But exactly the distance you should use, the wattage of the heat gun, the type of heat gun, how long you have to hold it there, I've not done it myself. So if any of you do use a heat gun with success, it would be great if you'd video that. That's obviously the best. But if you don't do that, that's fine, so long as you just give me a comment and tell me all of the details. The model number of the gun you have, the wattage, exactly how many centimeters or inches away it was, whether or not you maintained that distance perfectly throughout the heating time, how many minutes of heating time you used. Yeah, it would be helpful to other people who may want to go that route. But for the vast majority of people, baking in the oven is the right thing to do. And in my opinion, it's perfectly safe. You're not going to put something toxic in your oven that you're going to poison your family. I certainly wouldn't do that to my family. And again, I baked the card in our family oven 4 times. Don't use a toaster oven. Use a regular, normal oven, whether it be a convection type with a fan or just a normal type without a fan. Next, this is actually one of the more common questions. Black screen. You've done the bake, you've repasted, you've spent hours of your time. You were meticulous, you did everything perfectly in your opinion. But then when you powered on, you got a black screen. Now, some of you have reported that you got the bong, but you got a black screen. Others of you haven't reported getting the sound. You just said the screen is totally black, there's nothing on the screen at all. The good news is that in almost every case, it again is user error. You did something wrong. Specifically, you left one of the cables either disconnected or partially connected. And you might say, well, which one? Well, in the vast majority of cases, it is the thicker ribbon cable that you'll find in the middle of the iMac that is only left partially connected. And that is because, as you know, it's fairly short, and you've got to put your screen up there and you're just barely able to get it in there. And usually what happens is that ribbon cable connector, it comes down kind of at an angle, and you'll get one side in there and you think you have the other side in there, but you don't hear any audible click. There's no feedback that really tells you if it's in there or not, but you kind of think it is. Well, if you get a black screen, it isn't connected. So you're going to have to open up, and I would say completely disconnect it and then try reconnecting it properly. If you can get somebody to help you, that would be great. Hold the screen and don't let it fall forward, because you'll break the connector and the little ribbon cable in the upper left if you let it fall forward. Now, some people have asked, what about that little cable? Could that have caused a black screen? In most cases, no. The upper left corner, the thin ribbon cable, it's called the V-Sync cable. And some people have said, oh, don't worry about that. It's not important. You don't even need it at all. And to my reply to that is, well, hey, if you didn't need that V-Sync cable at all, Apple wouldn't have put it in there, right? You do need the V-Sync cable. If you break it, you need to replace it. If it's not connected properly, you need to connect it properly. It might create some sounds, audible sounds, if it's not connected properly. It might cause some jitter or some stability issues on the display. You need to take care of that cable if it's not connected properly or if it's broken. But for a black screen, it's usually the ribbon cable in the middle. If you think you fixed your ribbon cable, well, you need to check it again and check the connector on the motherboard. Maybe you yanked on it and you actually pulled out part of that connector. And if you did, it's not an easy fix. And some people have had to hire an external tech guy to help resolder that connector or replace it altogether. So you don't want to break off that connector, that's for sure. And if it still doesn't work, then it means there's some other cable that you left disconnected or only partially connected. All said, a black screen is usually almost always fixed by opening your machine and checking the connections again. Next, some of you have said, should you allow the video card to cool after the bake? And the answer to that is, well, yes, of course, you should allow it to cool, because if you don't, it's going to be too hot to handle when you put on the new thermal paste. I think what many of you mean when you say that is, how should you let it cool? And one guy actually asked me, he said, should I just leave the oven door open and let it cool naturally that way? And I say, yeah, that will work, so long as nobody comes along and knocks the card out. And one person did tell me that. He said a family member knocked it to the floor, and in his case, it was some kind of a very hard surface. It sounded like it could have been a hardwood floor or even concrete. And if it's a hard surface like that, you very well may damage the card. And he said he, pasted everything perfectly, and when he tested it, it didn't work. And I had to break the news to him, well, that fall probably did kill it, because there are ceramic components on board, especially ceramic capacitors. Now, normally it doesn't affect the really tiny ones, but if there's a larger ceramic capacitor on there, a sufficiently strong jolt will crack those. In other words, damage them. And sometimes you can get away without a capacitor or two on a design, but these cards are not made for you to remove capacitors, and it is possible that a jolt could damage those components. So I would warn all of you throughout the entire process of your bake, make sure you don't drop it. And definitely don't slam it down on a hard surface, because those ceramic components, they can break. But to actually cool it, you can, if you have a removable tray, that's really what I recommend. You can take the tray out. That's what I do. I just take the tray out and I put it on top of my kitchen table. I have a little, fuzzy thing that goes under, so I'm not going to burn the top of my table, of course, but I do not put a fan on it. I think some people probably do. Nobody's reported the warping of their video card by doing that, but I would say just let it cool naturally rather than putting a fan on it. If it's in an air-conditioned room, it doesn't really matter. Just let it cool. And it'll cool down pretty fast, especially if you take it out of the oven. So let it cool and then do your paste. Now, some have asked about the paste, and I cover that in the text description under my videos. But a lot of you don't read the text description, even though I kind of remind you to do that. Please, please, please click Show More on a desktop computer and drop it down, because I put links to everything you need to buy and a lot of detail in those. Even under this video, I plan to do that. And that tells you exactly what you need to buy. I would recommend the K4 and K5 Pro set, because I used that for 2 years and 9 months and had success with it. K4 Pro is not perhaps the best thermal paste for CPUs and GPUs in the world, but it's enough. Now, if you want the best, you can get Thermal Grizzly Cryonaut. And I also put a link to that in the text description. Because on some Amazons, I know in the Amazon in the US you can do it, K5 Pro, which is what you put on the memory chips, is often sold separately from K4 Pro. So in that case, you would buy K5 Pro separately and then buy Thermal Grizzly Cryonaut. And that would be the ideal pairing. But again, there's nothing wrong with K4 Pro. So if you want to use that, again, I got 2 years and 9 months out of it. And Cryonaut, I've used that to repaste my 15-inch 2015 MacBook Pro with success. I also used that to repaste my 6970M. So I have experience with both K4 Pro and Cryonaut. And so it really depends on you. I think the total cost might be roughly the same, maybe a little bit less if you got the K4 Pro and K5 Pro set. But Cryonaut is really the best paste you can buy. Don't use liquid metal. Don't use that. There's a lot I could say on why not, but even though the thermal conductivity is theoretically better, there's reasons why you really shouldn't use it. So don't use that. But for a paste that's not electrically conductive, I recommend, for the best paste anyway, Cryonaut. Is it better than Arctic Silver 5? Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And you might say, well, I still have some fairly fresh new pastes, MX4, MX2, Arctic Silver 5. If you use Arctic Silver 5, use it sparingly. It's not electrically conductive, but it is capacitive. It'll act like a little capacitor if it overspills and touches external surrounding components. So I would suggest you don't actually use it for that reason. Also, in terms of longevity, the manufacturers usually suggest not to use their paste beyond 1 year, and I kind of feel the same. It depends all on how you stored it. I store my paste in a sealed package inside a top drawer of my dresser in my room. It's dark, it's relatively cool, it's not too humid in there, and I think it keeps the paste moist, it keeps it from drying out. And if that's the way you store your paste, it would almost assuredly last a year. So if you bought yours a year ago, can you use it now? I would say yeah. Is it a year and a half? That's kind of pushing it, but yeah, probably it'll be okay. If it's closing in on 2 years since you've bought the paste, look, I'm just as cheap as the rest of you. I hate wasting things. That's the way I was raised. I hate throwing it out. You've only used a little bit. You have so much left over. It's a waste of money. It's a waste of the paste. You want to continue using it, right? You don't want to throw it out. I understand that, but you're not going to get the best performance out of it. In fact, if it's even older than 2 years, it's kind of getting into the danger zone. And that's what I did with my first bake. Not only did I not clean off all of the old thermal pad residue from the Apple heatsink, I used paste that was several years old, and that's a big no-no. I corrected myself in my second bake video with the K4 and K5 Pro. But yeah, definitely you want to use new paste wherever possible to get the best performance out of it. And lastly, some people have said to me, why even do the bake at all? You can get so much more performance. You can get a card that runs so much cooler. You can get a card that with the patcher will allow you to run Catalina even on the late 2009 27-inch iMac. And I have read up a lot about those cards, which are made for the PCs. Specifically, one person mentioned a Dell NVIDIA Quadro K2100M. K2100M is a card that's very often used in these old Macs. You can find other YouTube videos on the subject. There are other model numbers that people have used. These are NVIDIA cards. They're called MFM cards, and they fit in the same slot. They look largely the same, but they don't always perfectly match the heatsink, though. That's one caveat, I would say. Another caveat is that, well, most of us are Mac people. Not all. Some of you are from the PC world, and your very first Mac was a $100 Mac you bought from somebody, and you just wanted to test it out, and that's why you found my videos. I understand that. But the vast majority of you are kind of like me. You've been a Mac user for a long time, or maybe you're Mac exclusive. I am Mac exclusive. I started out with a Mac in 1984 with the Macintosh 128K, and I have used Macs continuously since then, and I've never purchased a PC. Never. I'm serious. I never purchased a Windows PC. I've used them. I think that's one of the reasons that has kept me from buying one. Yeah, even Windows 10. I'm not a fan. I'm not going to badmouth it. Some of you like it. I'm not badmouthing your choice. I'm just saying that those of us who are just diehard from the dawn of time, forever Mac users, we're just not into PCs. And for you to use like this Quattro NVIDIA card, you need to flash firmware to the card to get it to work on the iMacs. And to do that, you need a Windows PC. Some people say you can do it in boot camp. Okay, either way, you're going to need to install Windows. And you're going to need to know how to use it to some level. Not every Mac user can do that. Not every Mac user wants to do that. And so for that reason, I suggest to people, try the Bake. It's the cheapest and fastest solution, the vast majority of the time. How so? Some of the PC card advocates say, I only pay $50 for mine. Okay. The thermal paste is cheaper than that. And the amount of time that it's going to take you to open, remove the card, repaste, put everything back together, whether you do the Bake or whether you go the PC route, is going to be the same amount of time. But, yes, you have 10 minutes, the baking time, when you do the Bake, but it's probably going to take you more than 10 minutes to do the flashing. So it really is not maybe a whole lot, but it still is faster doing the Bake. And I would say there are fewer pitfalls. When you're flashing something, especially in an unfamiliar OS, a lot could go wrong. And you really have to follow the guidance very closely to get it right. So what I'm going to tell you is this. For the vast majority of you, try the Bake. It probably will work. Eventually the Bake will stop working, as in the case of my 4850. At that point, you have to decide three things. You're going to get rid of the Mac, buy a new one, which is going to cost you a lot of money. Are you going to go the PC card route, which means you're going to need Windows and you're going to need to flash it? Or are you going to do like I did, which is get a 6970M, which is a card that came in the original 2011 iMacs, 27-inch, and use that? I went that route because I perceived it to be the easiest route, and my card came with the original Apple heatsink. Now, some of you have pointed out that the card I actually have, my 6970M, based on the photos, has these little red angled pieces around on the four corners of the GPU, and some of you have said that is indicative of a Windows version, 6970M. If that's true, then the Hong Kong seller tricked me. Very possibly did. And that also implies that he put firmware on there to make it work, and maybe that firmware isn't quite identical to what Apple used on the 6970M for the 2011 iMac, and maybe that's why I have an auto power off problem. I don't know. But nevertheless, I believe that there are cards out there that aren't flashed. Even my flashed card has been working, and that's another reason I'm going to talk to you in a couple minutes here about it, that I'm making this video is to give you an update on that. Yeah, it's still working. It's still working, even to this day. So for most of you, you would probably be well served by those cards. They're not the fastest cards. The PC cards would be faster. They're not going to help you run Catalina. The PC cards might do that with a patcher, but I think it's easier overall to use an Apple card than a PC card. What's going to happen in the future if my 6970M dies? I'm going to try the Bake. If the Bake doesn't work, then I will either consider getting another iMac, which who knows how much in the future that's going to be. I might consider getting a new iMac. But I also might consider, especially for your sakes, getting an NVIDIA card and going about the flashing and making a very detailed video on that so you can see the entire process. And you can see the pitfalls more clearly. So, but that's something in the future. That's not something I'm planning to do now. So that's it for the FAQ. For the 6970M, I just have only a few comments that I want to say about that. It's been working great. For the past, 4.5 months since I gave you my last report on May 3rd, as of today, the making of this video, 4.5 months. Even through the summer months. You know, it gets pretty hot here in Japan. Not as hot as my hometown in the Central Valley of California, where it can hit like 43 degrees Celsius, 112 degrees Fahrenheit. This doesn't quite get that hot here, but it can hit 40 degrees Celsius here and 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Plus, you've got high humidity. We're talking in the 70s. So it can get hot here. But what I've done to keep the card cool and keep it running without any of those spontaneous, sudden power off problems is keep all 3 fans running at 2000 RPM. And when needed, room air conditioning. Because face it, folks, you're not going to want to sit there and sweat while you're using your computer. I mean, some of you might because you're that cheap, but mostly my family, even more than me, my wife and my children use it, and they're more sensitive, to wanting air conditioning, so they usually keep it on. And the room is not freezing cold, but it's a nice temperature, and that has kept the temperatures down into the low 60s or even in the 50s most of the time, even when my son is playing his Roblox game. That's the game he usually plays. So if you know Roblox, that is a game that it's not too demanding. There are many more games that just simply will not even run on the 6970M because it's too old. It's not powerful enough. So the games he runs are web games. They make the card heat up, that's for sure, but they're not too taxing. And I also did a test in one of my previous videos where I showed 4K videos or 1440p running YouTube videos for a long time, full screen. That can heat up your card too. But again, if you have your fans running at all 3 fans, by the way, at 2000 RPM, using the fan control app to set that up, with room air conditioning, you can keep the GPU temperature well below the high 70s. And in my experience, the high 70 degrees Celsius temperature is like 78 degrees or so. That is what triggered the power off. And just to repeat what I've said before, it is not a shutdown sequence. It's not a software thing. It is as if somebody had yanked the cable out and all the power to the iMac just suddenly goes down. That is the actual problem. But I haven't seen that since the making of my last video in May because I've been able to keep the card cool enough. So what that means, folks, is that if some of you have a 2009 iMac and you maybe had components that fell off your card, or you baked it just can't be baked anymore, you don't want to flash a card, you want to put in a card that's kind of trouble-free almost, you have to do a little bit of cutting, and some of you might be scared at that, but I made a video, right? I made the video that shows you how to actually do that cutting, which man or woman, even a teenager could do it. It's not that difficult. Maybe junior higher too could do it. It's not difficult, folks. You can put in a 6970M. It's just that those cards will cost you more than some of the PC cards, and that's why the PC guys usually, in addition to the cooler running operation and the faster speed, that's why the PC guys often recommend those PC cards and flashing them. But even I would say if you find a card like mine that has a matching heatsink, you definitely want to have the heatsink that Apple used in the 2011 iMac, which is the triple heat pipe type. Don't use your 4850 card's heatsink on a 6970M. It's not made for that. It will not cool it down enough. Even the matching heatsink, barely keeps it cool enough. You need to have a lot of airflow. Some people have suggested I take out my CD-ROM for greater airflow, and maybe that would do it, but I still actually have my CD-ROM drive in there. Yeah, it's still in there. And with 2000 RPM fan speeds for all 3 fans plus room air conditioning, I'm not having a problem anymore. So I would say, this is a card I can truly suggest and recommend, so long as you repaste it. Don't trust the seller. That's what I did. And it was shut down at a much lower temperature until I repasted it. The seller's pasted, watch my other video. It was a pretty horrible job. And the fact that somebody informed me he actually sold me a flashed PC version 6970M, that didn't sit too well with me, but at least I got the original triple heat pipe Apple heatsink with it, which is a very valuable and important piece of equipment when you're installing that particular video card because it just runs so hot. So I will conclude the video here. I wish to thank you for watching. If you have any comments, please leave them down below. Any questions, I'm happy to engage you there. I really am, folks. I like helping people. And I try to respond to you the same day. Sometimes some of you will post something, I'll see it and respond to you within minutes of you posting. because I'm happy to do it. I want to see you all find success. If you like this video, I'd certainly appreciate your click on the thumbs up button. If you're not already subscribed and want to see more content like this, please subscribe. If you'd like to go the extra mile and support this channel, please expand the text description out below. There's a PayPal link where you can help support this channel and make more great videos like this. I wish each and every one of you a great day. Thanks for watching, folks.